Hey everybody, this is your video on 510 Math Excel, which is quadratic inequalities. So on your first one, it says solve the following inequality: x squared minus 196 is less than 0. So the first thing you're going to want to do is take your square root of 196, which is 14, and then factor it so you have negative 14 and positive 14. Now, what's different about this with less than signs instead of equal signs is you can't just say your answer is 14 and negative 14. There's two possible combinations. So one combination is this first line, and then the second combination is the second line. So the first one would be the case where x plus 14 is less than 0 and x minus 14 is greater than 0. The other case would be, and the reason is because they have to be opposite signs, since opposite signs. The other case would be when x plus 14 is greater than 0, because that's the opposite, and when x minus 14 is less than 0. So what you have to do is then work out all four inequalities. The numbers are kind of easy, but it's like you got to figure out which one's and, which one's or, and then combining them sometimes. So for this one, x plus 14 is less than 0, so you get less than negative 14. For this one, you have greater than 0, so x is greater than 14. So that's one combination. And the other is when x is greater than negative 14 and x is less than 14. So these two together have to be ands. So this being true or this being true. Now, when you're looking at this, no value can be bigger than 14 and also smaller than negative 14. So what that means is you can rule that choice out. But you can have bigger than negative 14 and smaller than 14. So like on a number line, that would basically look like this in between. So you can have something bigger than negative 14 and smaller than 14. And so that means you're going to have negative 14 less than x less than 14. Now, on the Math Excel, they call this, it's a multiple choice problem, and what we call it is it's a sandwich inequality. Basically, x is between the two. So it's less than. So you can think less than with negative 14 and 14 as your boundaries. Okay, on our next one, it says negative x squared plus 5x plus 50 is less than 0. The first thing you're going to want to do is to turn this to a positive in order to be able to factor it. So when you multiply every term by negative 1, that's going to change it from a less than to a greater than. Because anytime you multiply or divide by negative, it changes the direction. So when you do that, you have positive x squared, and then minus 5x, and minus 50, and then greater than 0. So when you factor that, you'd have to use 10 and 5. And since it's a negative 5x, then the 10 has to be negative. Because your bigger number, let me write this down. Your bigger number has to match your b term. So since we have negative 5, then your 10 had to be negative. And then your 5 had to be positive because they had to be opposites. Okay, so here we have x minus 10 greater than 0 and x. Okay, so on this one, you have to have the scenario where x minus 10 is greater than 0 and x plus 5 is greater than 0. or you can have when both of them are less than. So that'd be x minus 10 less than 0 and x plus 5 less than 0. So when you solve those inequalities, you get x greater than 10, x greater than negative 5. So that situation. Now what that is, it's like negative 5 and positive 10. I'll shade it in a moment. The other one is where it's less than 10 and less than negative 5. So what you have to do is combine them. So you basically pick the one where it's smaller than negative 5, so to the left of this one, or to the right of 10. You don't want to shade the overlap. You basically need to go greater than 10, so forget about this one, or smaller than negative 5, so forget about this one. So again, that's called combining the and inequalities into one inequality. So out of this group, you pick one of them, basically greater than the biggest number, and on this one, you'd say less than the smallest number. So let me jot that down. So greater than the biggest number, and this one is smaller than the smallest number. Or I should say less than the smallest number. And then you combine it into one. So you have x smaller than negative 5 or x greater than 10. By the way, this Math Excel only has 8 questions, but there are many parts. If you go step by step, on some of them there's like 20 or 25 steps. That's why I'm trying to show you it this way. On the next one, it says 2x squared plus 26x plus 84 is greater than or equal to 0. First thing you want to do is divide out the 2 to every term. So you have x squared plus 13x plus 42 is greater than or equal to 0. Then you want to factor it, and like we did before with 42 for your AC and your 13 for your B. So you're going to use 6 plus 7 and 6 times 7. So that would be x plus 6 times x plus 7 greater than or equal to 0. So now when it gets to the inequality part, you're going to say x plus 6 is greater than or equal to 0 and x plus 7 is greater than or equal to 0. Or you're going to have both of them smaller than or equal to 0. So this would be x greater than or equal to negative 6 and negative 7, or x less than or equal to negative 6 and x less than or equal to negative 7. So when you think about that, negative 6 would be here and negative 7 would be here, and then you want smaller than negative 7, so basically that direction, and bigger than this one, like that. So basically when it's a greater than or equal to, remember the greater or, and we even said greater, like great or. Those are ways you can remember it. And so it's going to be left and a blank, and then it's going to be right. Okay, the next one is a multiple choice graph with red and blue. It says graph the inequality, and you have x squared minus 9x is less than 0. So the first thing you want to do is factor out your x, because that's your greatest common factor, and then you go x times x minus 9 less than 0. If you just treat it as if it were equal to 0, then your x-intercepts would be at 0, 0, and 9, 0. So when you're doing a rough sketch, you'd have 0 and 9. So that means that's your x-intercepts, which are your zeros. Now you also have to think about having a positive x squared, which means it's going to open up. And so it's going to be like this. If it were negative x squared, it would open down. Okay, but on this one it's a positive x squared, and so it opens up. So what we're looking at is a graph that kind of looks like this at 0 and 9. Now, with our inequality, it says x squared minus 9x is less than 0. If you want it less than 0, that means it has to be below the x-axis. So all your solutions have to be below the axis, which in this case means between 0 and 9. So you have 0 less than x less than 9. Okay, so the next one, number 5, is one of your longer questions. It says the function y equal negative x squared plus 22x models the profit y in dollars earned by a tour guide when x people sign up for a tour. And there's 3 parts on this. The first one is how many people need to go on the tour for them to make at least $72. So to start with, you have your negative x squared plus 22x greater than or equal to 72. And what you do is move your 72 over so it's negative. Then if you treat it as if it were equal to 0, and then just do your AC this way and your B that way, you'd find out what numbers you have to use. So this is one of those weird ones where there's a negative sign in front. And so what we do is factor out the negative. I guess let me write this step. So x squared minus 22x plus 72 equals 0. So we want to keep the negative sign factored out. And then in order to get a positive 72 with a negative 22b term, remember to use 72 divided by x and just look in your table. So again, the reason is because it's a rational function, but it's used for inverse variation, where you say some number times another number equals 72. So what we want for this one, since we have negative 22, is we would have to use negative 4 with negative 18. Because when you multiply those two negative numbers, you get positive 72. And when you do negative 4 minus 18, you get negative 22. So what that means is you have negative and then x minus 18, x minus 4 equal to 0. So that means your x-intercepts would be 4 and 18. And so what we want is between those numbers. So 4 less than or equal to x, less than or equal to 72. The main reason you know it would be between is because if you multiply or divide by negative 1, then you would change your greater than or equal to less than or equal to. So when multiply by negative 1, change the direction, and that would change to x squared minus 22x minus 72 is less than or equal to 0. And that would be the less than, which means you're going to have an and type inequality. Okay, now we're going to do something similar for having a profit of 121. So when you do this one, you say greater than 121, which means you're going to say negative 121 and then greater than 0. Now this is one that's a perfect square. If you do your square root of 121, you get 11. Again, it's handy or quicker if you know your square roots. So you'd factor out your negative sign, and then you'd have x minus 11 squared. So for any value of x, the result would be negative because the graph looks like that, which means there's no solution. In other words, it never crosses the x-axis. Now the next one says, is it possible to lose money on a tour, which means make a negative profit? So this one you say less than 0 that way. And you just want to factor out your x to find out your x-intercepts, which in this case are 0 and 22. You can't really have losing money with no people going. And so what you would be wondering at this point is, does that mean it's going to be less than 22 people or greater? And if you just kind of use common sense and know your number, if you have too many people, then you might lose money based on the graph, because you might have to pay for extra concessions or something like that, which doesn't really balance out the cost. So you want between 0 and 22 people. Maybe that's how many people could fit on the tour bus or on the tour boat. Just something to think about. Okay, the next one is also a longer type question. It's number 6. It says, a friend plans to use 70 feet of fencing to surround 3 sides of a rectangular vegetable garden. The 4th side is going to be bordered by a wall, like touching your house. So then what they say is to write a function that models the area A when the length is x feet. So you really do want to draw a picture with this. The first thing is, based on my number 70, I've got to divide by 2 and get 35. So that means on the left side I'm going to have 35, and on the right side I'm going to have 35. The other thing is, if you have x divided by 2, that means you'd have a minus half x here and a minus half x there. So your equation would be length times width, which would be x times 35 minus a half x. And so if you just distribute your x, you get 35x minus a half x squared. The next part says, for what lengths is your area greater than 300 square feet? So we have our 35x minus a half x squared greater than 300. So then you move your 300 over, so it's minus 300 greater than 0. You're also going to want to put your x squared term first, so it would actually make more sense, because we like doing decreasing powers of that. So we have negative a half x squared plus 35x minus 300 equals 0. In order to solve this, we need our coefficient of x squared to be positive 1. So we need to multiply every term by negative 2. So when you do that, you get positive x squared minus 70x, 35 times negative 2 is negative 70, and plus 600, because negative 300 times negative 2 is positive 600. Once you figure out that step, then you can factor it, and the numbers should be pretty easy to work with because of so many zeros. In this case, we would use negative 10 and negative 60 to turn into negative 70. And when you multiply negative 10 times negative 60, you get positive 600. So what that means is you want values of 10 and 60. So based on your graph, your values would have to be between there. So it's 10 less than x less than 60. Now the next time they want an area greater than 600, and so we're basically going to do the exact same thing, except for when you have your 600, we've got to double it to 1200. So basically the same steps as before. So when we do this, we have our x squared minus 70x plus 1200 equals 0. So on this one, we've got to use 30 and 40. So that means your values are between there. And that's what your graph looks like. Now the next part says, is it possible for the area to be bigger than 700? Because remember, we did 300, then we did 600. Well, what about 700? So this is the part where you really want to pay more attention to my video than what the View an Example recommends. They want you to use the formula x equal negative b over 2a, and that's a lot of extra steps. Instead, what you should just do is get your vertex from the maximum, just like we've done before. So basically, just go to a document, go negative 0.5x squared plus 35x minus 300. So you are going to have to adjust your window. You can barely see it right there. I'm just going to change this to like 60 and then do menu 4A, so that'd be a pretty decent window. Looks like I need to make it bigger than 60. Let me make it 80. Okay, so that's a good window. And so when values are between these two numbers, then it'd be negative. I'm sorry, between the numbers would be positive. Outside the numbers would be negative. What we want is to get the maximum. So you go to Analyze Graph and then 3 for maximum and go between here and here. That's going to be your 35 with 312.5. Now I think I put in 300 because that was the original. What I should have used was with the 600. Oh, actually, when we double it, it's like that. Okay, so we really need 1200 or 1400 here. Okay, so when we do 1400, then menu, analyze, maximum. Between here and here, gives you that point. Okay, I'm resuming the video here. What I made a mistake on earlier was I tried to use one of these formulas with either the negative 300 or the negative 600, but what you want to use is just the 35x minus a half x squared with no number there, because we don't know like what that number would be. So when you do that and just graph it with 35x minus a half x squared, and then just set your window, then you would have the maximum to be 35, 612.5. So what that means is that your maximum area is 612.5. And so it's not possible to be 700. 612.5 is your max. Okay, the last two have to do with tables, and it does tell you it's a quadratic equation. You don't need to do quadreg. What you want to do is just notice your symmetry where these two match up and these two match up. So if you're looking at x-intercepts where y is 0, then that's going to help us be our critical points. Now what we want for this question is when it's greater than 0. So if we want positive numbers, then that means to the right of 9 and to the left of negative 9. Values are positive to the left of negative 9 and to the right of positive 9. So we have x less than negative 9 or x greater than 9. Okay, your last question is the same thing with the exact same table in my case, but this time we want y less than or equal to 0. So all you do is basically reverse it. You want in between negative 9 and 9. So x is trapped there. So basically in between here you have negative numbers. And so that's that graph, or that inequality. Okay, hope that helps.